Geeks, geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic fans the world over, welcome to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a seasoned, world-renowned, world-famous comic book writer, about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's get right to your questions. David Zwally, if you had the chance to write any Atlas Seaboard characters, which ones would you be interested in? Now, for those of you who don't know, Atlas Comics was a short-lived comic book company created by some former Marvel folks. And it sort of came and went within a year in the early 70s. These were newsstand comics. And some of them I liked, some of them I didn't. A lot of top professionals worked on these. Steve Ditko, Wally Wood, people like that. But the two titles that I thought was most intrigued by and would love to work on if they were ever revived was number one, The Scorpion, created by Howard Chaykin, drawn by Howard Chaykin, and then sort of taken away from him and turned into a very generic mass superhero by issue 3. This was kind of the way Atlas Comics went. They'd start off well and then get taken away from the original creators, and sort of slapdash versions of them would replace the what had appeared in the first or second issue. But Scorpion quickly devolved into a pretty crappy comic once Howard Chaykin left. But Scorpion was, very much in the Indiana Jones mode, 1930s pulp hero, adventurer, vigilante type guy, and the first issue is just killer, just great stuff. And I love that genre, 1930s high adventure period stuff. So I jump on that one. The other one, kind of a goofy idea. Instead of Planet of the Apes, Planet of the Vampires. But it's so high concept and wacky. I just love the idea of taking action sci-fi and combining it with horror in such a way. And no, it has nothing to do with the Italian science fiction film Planet of the Vampires, which is, for my money, one of the greatest looking movies ever. And it's so incredibly boring. So those are the two titles I would have jumped on back in the day. Okay, Twin Spin. David Zwally again. What Golden Age public domain characters do you think you'd be interested in writing? I think you'd do a great job writing the Black Terror. Well, I have written the Black Terror in the past. Bo Smith and I did a miniseries at Eclipse, sort of updating the character. So I've done the Black Terror. One I'm interested in very much is, and I think is one of the best of the Golden Age era comic book characters, is the Black Cat, as written and drawn by Lee Elias. And the stories were always fun. Black Cat was, I believe her name was Linda Daniels. She was a Hollywood stunt woman who by day and by night, she was a scantily clad crime fighter. But the stories were always fun and engaging, kind of blue sky kind of stories with a terrific supporting cast. And it'd be fun to write something set in 1950s period Hollywood. Another one, which is one of these forgotten series, it appeared in Military Comics. It was created and drawn by Jack Cole, and it was Death Patrol, and it was kind of a flying foreign legion. It was a far wackier version of Blackhawks. And the gimmick behind Death Patrol is that on each mission, each story, one of the lead characters would die and then be replaced in the following episode. But they're just crazy, wacky. There's just a lot to it, these things. And it's Jack Cole, so it's endlessly inventive. And it'd be fun to not necessarily do this in the style that Jack Cole did it. I would never try to ape Jack Cole, but I just love the concept of like basically a flying Suicide Squad. And but largely, I mean, there's a lot of great public domain characters out there. And then there's a lot of stinkers because, as I've said before, majority of the Golden Age comics were created by people indifferent to the medium. They were just, working for a paycheck, and who can blame them? A lot of writers and artists slumming in the comic book business and not really happy about doing it or have any interest in advancing the art form. But there are, some great characters, and there's a bunch of great Golden Age characters I wouldn't touch because I couldn't improve on them. Plastic Man or the original Captain Marvel. I couldn't improve on and I couldn't recapture the vibe that those original creators like Jack Cole and Otto Binder and C.C. Beck, that lightning in the bottle that they had captured. Anyway, hey, have you subscribed? If you haven't, please do so. If you have, thanks a lot. You're helping to build this channel. I'm inching closer and closer and closer to 10,000 subscribers, and I need the help of every single one of you to get there and to grow this channel, grow this audience, and share it. Share the fun. Guy Cordray. Several videos ago, you mentioned some British comics a while back and devouring them. I've looked at some, probably not the same ones you did, and aside from Doctor Who with art by Dave Gibbons, they never grabbed me. Do you recall which specific comics you read and what you liked about them? Well, in last week's video, I talked about some of the 2000 AD characters that I really liked. So I'm not going to go over them again. But mostly the other characters I like from the British comics are in the war genre. And two things really stand out. They're both written and created by Pat Mills and drawn by John. I'll never go near that name. I can't remember how to pronounce his last name. It's a tough one. But Johnny Red, who I first found when I was actually in England, and I bought some, weeklies. Some action, battle picture weeklies and things like that. And I discovered Johnny Red. And Johnny Red is an RAF pilot who ends up stranded in Siberia during World War II. And he's sort of drafted into the Soviet Air Force. And he becomes a terror to, the Nazis invading Russia at the time. And the thing is, this is a crazy concept and it's wild, but it's not that far from the truth. My own dad told me about, he was in the 8th Air Force, and he told me that there were missions on which they sent B-17s to bomb targets deep in Germany. And they were, and at that point, they were past the point of no return, so they couldn't fly back to England. And their only choice was to continue flying and land in Russia. And it was quickly understood that once they landed in Russia, they were staying there. The Soviets would confiscate the bomber, strip all the armor off it, and then use it themselves. And a lot of these airmen, U.S. airmen, taken to who flew to the Soviet Union, did not return until after the war. They were simply kept there. And isolated from the rest of the Soviets because they didn't want to spread that nasty democracy to any of the serfs. Anyway, that's a total aside, but it lends some verisimilitude to Johnny Red, which is just a terrific action, war story. Lots of shoot 'em up and everything else. On a more serious note, is Charlie's War, a deservedly celebrated series that appeared in British weeklies about World War I, and it is there's just amazing stuff. I actually learned a lot by reading Charlie's War because Pat Mills really did his homework, and no matter how wild and crazy and insane the action seems in Charlie's War, it's all stuff based on events that really happened. I didn't know until I read Charlie's War to what extent the Germans were actually able to bomb London during World War I, not World War II, and how deadly the Zeppelins were. But there's everything about trench warfare and sniping and dysentery and disease and corruption within the ranks of the British Army. all kinds of stuff, and and wonderfully researched imagery. There's nothing to complain about in Charlie's War. It's one of the best war stories out there in comic form, and it's it's up there with like DC war comics, in my opinion, and anybody who watches this channel knows that DC war comics to me are the best war comics ever produced in the world, and Charlie's War really approaches that level of depth of emotion and consequence and all the rest of it. So it's absolutely worth checking out, a comics classic. Roberto Dungato. I haven't read your work on Green Arrow, so I don't know how it was there, but I will ask, why on earth do so many comic artists and or filmmakers seem to almost never bother to check references for use and technique of bows and arrows? I get fantasy and suspension of disbelief, and in the case of video games, balance issues, making the ranged fighter weaker for hand-to-hand encounters, but the craft itself requires insane amount of concentration, physical strength, training, and coordination. Kind of prime material for stories, right? Yeah, I mean, when I took on Green Arrow, I bought a couple of books, instructional books on archery, so that I would know all the terminology. This is before the internet was really going strong and you could just Google stuff like this. So I bought a number of books on archery and read them so that I, had the words to use when talking about archery. Also, I did a little bow shooting myself. I'm no bowman, but I have shot, maybe a couple of hundred arrows from various kinds of bows, including compound bows and long bows. So I, kind of, at least conversant and understood the dynamics and physical demands of shooting a bow. My youngest son's really good with a bow. I just sort of played around with them, but like I said, I fired several hundred shafts at a local park just to get just to get a feel for the weapon. David Zwally again. I was wondering if you could write a war comic for either DC, Marvel, or Charlton. Which would you prefer? Absolutely DC Comics, as I mentioned before, my favorite war comics. I'd leap in a heartbeat on any of the DC war comics franchises. Haunted Tank, obviously Sergeant Rock, even Weird War. Why not? I love that stuff. I love DC's approach. Gunner and Sarge, Enemy Ace, The Losers, Unknown Soldier, all of them. I loved all of them. Now, for as far as other companies go, I would like to do a superhero, World War II superhero thing, an Invaders kind of thing. In fact, years and years ago, I had proposed for Marvel a story in which that had Wolverine and Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos. Because Wolverine would have been around during World War II. He would have been, I would assume, a Canadian soldier. I've never heard this mentioned. Maybe it's been mentioned in the past, but it would be Logan with the Howling Commandos. And in the story, I don't mind telling it now because I'm never going to get to write it. It's never going to appear anywhere. But in the story, it's uncovered that the Nazis are cooperating with the Badoon, which is an alien race introduced in Silver Surfer comics. And the Badoon are providing the Nazis with these super weapons to defeat the Allies. And in fact, there is a secret Badoon Nazi base on the dark side of the moon. And the Commandos and Logan end up on the moon fighting Nazis with Captain America and Bucky along as well. And my favorite part of the story is that it's Bucky who is the first person who encounters the Watcher in the blue area of the moon. He's the first person in the Marvel universe to ever meet and talk to the Watcher. But sadly, I never got to do it. The proposal was shot down again and again and again. Neo Bazik, have you ever written a televised episode of The Simpsons? If so, one, how do you manage to avoid making mistakes with so many details in the series run? And two, what rules did they give you to write it? If you have not, why do you think they haven't considered you for that television task? Number one, I didn't go to Harvard. Number two, I'm not in the Writers Guild. There was like a blood-brain barrier between writing for the comics and writing for TV. This was true like at DC as well when there was the Batman animated series. The comic writers were not welcome to pitch ideas for the animated series because we just weren't part of that crowd. But the Simpsons writing room is pretty closed shop. I think it's all Harvard grads. So, kind of locked out there, even though they didn't mind stealing a few ideas from comic book stories that myself and my wife wrote when we were on The Simpsons. As far as restrictions on continuity for both the TV show and the comic book, The Simpsons famously flaunts continuity. So there really were, the rule on continuity was there were no rules. And if you wanted to make fun of the fact that there was no consistent continuity in The Simpsons, you were perfectly welcome to do that. And in fact, encouraged to do it because, often on the television show and in the comics, there are jokes about continuity errors or repetition or redundancies in the storyline, or characters conveniently forgetting that they had experienced the things they are experiencing now before. And so, there are a lot of asides to the audience about that. So, yeah. But yeah, I never got to write for the TV show yet because it's still running. You never know. Phone might ring. I'll hold my breath right now. User PE4GN3JG9I. Somebody just played their fingers across the keyboard for that one. I was wondering if you had an ending in mind for Dick Grayson, Nightwing, and what do you think of Nightwing settling down with Batgirl Barbara Gordon? I never had an ending for Nightwing in mind because when you work on American superhero comics, there is no ending. I knew that one day I would be handing the character off to a creator who would replace me on the title. Either I would, quit the title as I did. I left the title voluntarily, or you get fired because they go, we don't like you stink. We don't like your writing anymore. Get out of here. My brother-in-law wants to write it. But no, I never had an ending in mind. As for Dick and Barbara being together, I can't see them settling down together because even though I'm the one who introduced the Dick Grayson Barbara Gordon romance and made it a subplot in the Batman universe for many, many years, I always saw it as a on again, off again thing. They were definitely in what writers call the love rack, where they had their ups and downs. They had all these things that were pulling them together and drawing them apart at the same time, and creating this romantic tension. Once you settle the characters down, I love you too. Let's move in together. Then it gets boring. Particularly for a monthly periodical where you got to keep that pot boiling, got to keep those plot lines sizzling. And so while they were a perfect match for each other, and I love writing the characters together, and I hope I succeeded in making you love both of the characters, so that you were, you liked the fact that they were in love with each other, that they had a successful romantic relationship. I'm happy about all that, but you can't just leave that kind of thing status quo because it gets dull. Mikkel 300, Captain Potato Salad. When can we expect that comic book? Looking forward to it. Captain Potato Salad is not mine. Denny O'Neil, whenever he'd be talking about comics, he would have either Potato Salad Man or Captain Potato Salad would be his fill in the blank character. If he was just generally talking about comics, and it's like, and every month in Captain Potato Salad, this has to happen, or you do a dramatic story where Potato Salad Man's girlfriend dies, whatever. So it was just a fill in the blank working title whenever he didn't want to specifically mention a certain superhero character. So that's all Denny. Coco Joe Blacksnake, did you mention a writer's page rate? But you did mention a writer's page rate, but didn't say what yours was. Understandable. But could you give us an idea of what a starting out writer could ask for? I know it depends on talent and who you know a bit, but I would appreciate the info. Yeah, I mean, you can't expect me to tell you what my rate is. And I have various rates. I mean, I have work for hire rate, and then I have another rate if I'm going to have some skin in the game, if I'm going to be seeing royalties for the project. That rate's lower. And then I have another, and then my rate's negotiable depending on how interesting the project is, or how big my back end piece is going to be, and how much faith I have in the project. I generally have faith in all my projects, and you want, if you're working for particularly an independent comic producer, you want to give them a break, you want to give them a hand, especially if they're a friend. And then of course, many things I've written on spec. My Sister Suprema, I wrote on spec. I'm continuing to write on spec. Something Big, things like that were written on spec with the expectation of back end. It's why, I have a Subscribestar account and a Patreon account, because I use them to pay the artists. I can't expect artists to work on spec, but I'm perfectly willing to do so if I have faith in the project and, I own it. So, it's mine, and mine and the artist. I always share any project I create, new project I create, like My Sister Suprema, like Something Big, like the upcoming Joe Gunn. It's 50-50 partnership between me and the artist, even though I came up with the concept originally. They're the ones that have to visualize it. They're the artists. They're the ones that have to sell it. Okay? I can come up with like terrific concepts, but if the art sucks or is uninspired, it ain't going nowhere, because nobody's going to read it. But as far as page rates go, I will tell you that when I started out in comics, I had a $35 page rate. And that seemed to be the standard starting page rate, because Eclipse paid me $35 and Marvel paid me $35 at the same time, and they weren't comparing notes. That just was the accepted starting rate, $35 a page. Within a year, I was up to $50 a page, and then it kept climbing from there. And eventually I got to the point where DC was setting my rate, and then Marvel would always match it if I worked at Marvel. So there you go. And then, of course, royalty rates and all the stuff, because royalties is really where it's at in comics. I mean, that's where the real money is. If you can get on something that sells and continues to sell. I mean, I'm still getting paid for things I did 30 years ago. If they appear in print, or they're sold in digital, they're included in an omnibus or whatever, I'm seeing money from that continuously, more so from DC than Marvel. So, Zion Leach 3001. I have two questions. How do I advertise my comic? And what are the reasons a seemingly successful comic will get canceled? How you advertise? I mean, it's so hard to get the word out now, because, once upon a time, when the internet was more wild, wild west, you could go on a few message boards, back when the message boards were a thing, and reach, tens of thousands of people at a time. It's so difficult now because our tech overlords have, they control content. And even though we provide the content, they control who sees what. We've all heard of shadow banning and things like that. Well, it's real. It really happens. And even as a matter of policy, Facebook and a bunch of other outlets, they restrict the amount of access you have to your own followers, to your own subscribers. So it's very, very difficult. What I would suggest, and this is really hard because it takes a while over time, is build an email list. And when you send out emails, that people are getting them, unless, of course, they're finding a way to restrict your email access as well. But I think you can be pretty much assured, do not go through MailChimp, because they will restrict your email access. They will say, oh, we're going to send this out to 50,000 people, and 4 people get your email. So they're as bad as the rest of the tech overlords. Do it yourself. Build an email list and do it yourself. And then just try to get on podcasts. Try to get anywhere. I mean, if a guy has 12 listeners, get on his podcast. Social media, use it, but then you got to hammer it. You got to hammer at social media. And at X and at Facebook, the only real reliable way to reach people is, direct messaging. And but I don't know if X restricts direct messaging, but Facebook restricts you to 50 direct messages a day, of the same thing. I mean, if you say, hey, I just did cotton potato salad #1. See what I did there? Cotton potato salad #1 is on sale now, but you can only tell 50 people a day. They restrict that. So I mean, it's a hard uphill slog to promote yourself in this very Orwellian world. And that's really the only place. I mean, what are you going to do? Take out a billboard, advertise your comic on the side of a bus. Your only way to do this is, the internet through this medium. And it's a tough one. I mean, it's tough for me, and I have a recognizable name. I've been in the business a long time. But it's just to give you an example. I mean, when Graham Nolan did one of his projects for Compass Comics, his self-published things, he's got it all over Facebook. He's posting. Well, I didn't see the post for 3 weeks. And I'm communicating with Graham almost every day in one form or another. I mean, I should have been the first person to hear about it. But it took 3 weeks till I saw anything about it. So that's just to give you an example. Now, why does a seemingly popular comic get canceled? Because it was only seemingly popular. I remember in the 70s when I would go up for interviews at DC, and they would have mass interviews on Wednesday afternoon with wannabe comic book creators, and they'd have you all in a conference room and crush your dreams. And I remember it was Bob Rozakis, and I can't remember the other guy, and they very gently crushed us because comics were in a bad shape then. Anyway, they said they started asking us questions as fans, as wannabes. And they said, what do you think the best-selling comic at DC is? And one of the guys said, oh, Green Lantern, Green Arrow. And they said, no, it's Jonah Hex. And Green Lantern, Green Arrow is at cancellation point. And they said, how many copies do you think it sells? And I go, oh, it sells 500,000 copies. No, it barely sells 100,000, which in those days was cancellation. And they said that, Green Lantern and Green Arrow get a lot of attention in the fan press and with fans, but readers don't buy it. Only fans seem to like it. And that taught me a lot. That made me realize I want my audience to be casual comic book readers, not fans, because that's where sales were. That's where money was. That's where the audience was. I didn't want to play in the lounge. I wanted to play in the big room. So anyway, long answer to your question. If a book's canceled, it's generally because of bad sales, even if it's seemingly popular. I mean, another example is when I was on G.I. Joe at IDW, my title was the biggest selling, next to Larry Hama's, of all of the G.I. Joe titles, but got the least attention because I wasn't creating a G.I. Joe comic necessarily that diehard comic book fans liked. I was creating one that G.I. Joe fans liked. So I didn't get a lot of attention in the fan press about it, which I don't care about. It sold well. And I was happy to be doing the work. But the guys working on the other two titles were doing more of the kind of comics, the more sort of grim, dark, convoluted, complex storylines that diehard comic book fans like, comic book aficionados, comic book sophisticates. And I wasn't aiming for that audience. I was aiming for the casual reader, as I always do. So there you go. I'm not carping. I'm not griping. That's just the way things is. Okay. WTK 6069. Chuck, since it's presidential election time again, I need to ask the most pressing issue facing the country at the moment. any possibility of a sequel to Trump's Space Force. I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, I'll get together with Tim Lim. Maybe we'll want to do this again. It was certainly worth doing. We sold a lot of these, and it was a good payday for everybody. And I enjoyed working on it. So maybe we'll further the adventures of Trump's Space Force. It'd be interesting to revisit it given the events of the recent years. You know, well, maybe something involving Trump's current legal troubles being caused by aliens, which is really, you know, is that hard to believe? With that, was that stretched disbelief that perhaps a malignant alien influence, maybe something with Putin, the Russian Space Force. So I don't know. The ideas are endless. I'm going to email Tim Lim today and say, hey, you want to do another one of these? Michael J. Partika. Oh man, I'm sorry, sir. Anyway, you mentioned that you would not write Nightwing under the now current restrictions. What restrictions are those? Well, first of all, you've got a bunch of completely talentless editors. And also, they still apparently keep insisting on promoting their own political agenda over the desires of the readers to simply be entertained by a comic book story. There's a restriction. They don't seem to be hiring the most talented artists at the moment. There's an awful lot of underemployed or unemployed artists out there I'd love to work with, but they probably would get somebody that they approved of. And I don't think that they, would appreciate my style of storytelling anymore. I wouldn't make the comic book about me. I would make it about Nightwing. So those are the current restrictions. The other current restrictions would be lower page rates and certainly lower sales. And as I think I've made it clear in the last few answers I gave to questions, is I really am interested in reaching an audience. I don't want to think this. Nobody wants to write something no one's going to read or very few people are going to read, because it's a measure of success that you've reached an audience. I mean, I'm sitting here writing and trying to think of things that will entertain, engage, surprise, delight the reader. And if there ain't anybody out there being engaged, surprised, or delighted, I mean, why the hell am I doing this? And with the current sales figures at DC and Marvel, it's kind of a sad affair. So yeah, those are the current restrictions. That is the current status quo. Okay. Hey, if you got questions, suggestions, whatever, you can send them to brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. A number of the questions I answered this week are off of YouTube. Yes, you can post questions down below this very video you're watching, but chances are I might miss them. I don't often pull questions from YouTube, but this week I did. But anyway, any questions or anywhere you send them is appreciated, but most appreciated if you send them to brunobookstore@gmail.com so I don't miss them. So there you go. Hey, My Sister Suprema. If you're not reading it, why aren't you reading it? It's free at ArcTunes. And there's also a Volume 1, Volume 2 to come soon. Volume 1, European size comic album of My Sister Suprema. We're calling it the Origin issue. And that is available on Amazon. But you can always go to ArcTunes and read the series for free in its original digital format. And check out Anthony Gonzalez Clark's amazing artwork. He really does put this thing over the top for me and make it funnier than I wrote it even. So that's it for me. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you for subscribing, liking, whatever else you did to help me support this little endeavor of mine. And I will see all of you down.